Working to Solve for X in Twin Peaks Episode 4. It's written by Andy Hageman and read by Laura Stewart. There is a surplus of fan-favourite quotable lines in Twin Peaks Episode 4, and I think the chewiest is when Audrey Horne tells Donna Hayward, in real life there is no algebra. There is a telling irony in this quip. On the surface, Audrey's articulating with all the confidence of a high school teenager how useless she feels her math education is to what matters in life. And yet, Audrey pivots right into asking Donna questions that will help her figure out who killed Laura Palmer. Audrey desperately wants to solve for X so she can secure the attention and love of Agent Cooper. Algebra is a system of substituting signs and symbols for missing information in order to facilitate a process of putting pieces together. Simply put, Audrey is actively doing algebra, and so is nearly everyone else in this episode. As scene after scene features investigations, new clues, and epiphanies. What follows is a map of the episode's algebra, with close attention to the more intense equations. Opening the episode is an eerie floating shot of the Palmer house. It's better to say a Palmer house, though, since this is not the iconic house that features more prominently throughout the series. While this alternative house may be of use in building theories of multiple timelines in the wake of Season 3, what I find more intriguing is the unsettlingly unidentified point of view conjured through the camera movement. Emotion implies a force, an agency, or the sense of a dream without a dreamer. It's eerie because we get the feeling there's an agent vocalizing what would typically be an objective establishing shot. As an algebra equation, this beginning prompts us to wonder if there's an X to solve, but that's deeper into the grain of the place and plot than the previous episodes have suggested. Inside the Palmer house, the transfer of an image from Sarah Palmer's internal vision to an investigation-ready sketch is underway. As the camera movement and cuttings circulate around the living room, there's an emphasis on faces. Sarah Palmer's as she re-experiences the trauma of her vision, and that vision as a metonymy of the trauma of losing Laura. Deputy Andy Brennan's face of concentration as he combines active listening with artistic acumen, bolstering the alternative masculinity he's brought to the series from his first appearance in the pilot. And the face of the man in Sarah's vision. She describes his hair as grey on grey. That line is a tautology, but just like Audrey on algebra, Sarah's impression also contains the multiplicity of something that is more than one, but not quite two. Leland Palmer emerges from behind a screen in the living room. He has been in the scene the whole time, yet we didn't see him. Leland is a person who is there and not there, observing while not being observed. He draws everyone's attention when he shares that Sarah has, in fact, had two visions. He delivers this news with a vocal tone and body language that make it a barb aimed at Sarah, and her facial reaction and vocal tone reply to Leland in kind. There's a domestic code at work here, an algebra of aggression, and something else that only these two know. As he speaks, Leland is framed by the camera with a painting in the background of a person that makes a visual near rhyme with his posture and the colour of his robe. That an artistic rendering in the room rhymes with him operates like an unconscious clue that there might be another artistic rendering in the room that connects with Leland. So if we retrace the signals in the show that point at Leland, this scene is one, whether intentionally made that way or not. The scene ends with a close-up of Donna's face as she reacts to Sarah recounting how her second vision included the excavation of the necklace that Donna and James buried together. Donna manages to hold her face steady so that no one in the room will observe her inner turmoil and desire to find out if there is an X regarding that necklace and that she and James would have to solve for. Underscoring her duality in the moment is an audio bleed of the opening from the soap opera within Twin Peaks, Invitation to Love. Then a cut to Lucy Moran as she summarises the current episode to Sheriff Truman and Deputy Andy. Now the episode shifts into another scene of investigation and interrogation. Visually, the scene opens on Dr. Jacoby, a local psychiatrist who is holding 2 golf balls between 3 fingers. The golf balls held at the same level as his eyes, which are already a focal point due to his red and blue 3D glasses, make another visual rhyme in the episode. They look like a second set of eyeballs, but one that does not see. Jacoby then creates the illusion of magic as he seems to pop one of the golf balls into his own ear, then produces a golf ball from his mouth. Cooper observes the performance without comment, and with a facial expression of what seems like exasperation, barely contained by the need to ensure the Doctor will be a cooperative witness. As a viewer, it's easy to be pulled into Cooper's dismissive reaction to Jacoby's show, for, as many critics point out, Cooper is the avatar and point of identification for viewers who are also outsiders entering the town of Twin Peaks and trying to uncover its secrets and solve its mysteries. But disentangle yourself from Cooper, and Jacoby's sleight of hand tells the truth in the form of a lie. Those things that enter the ear and come out of the mouth are illusions. They are real, just as the golf balls are real, but they're deployed with misdirection to lead to false conclusions. This is one of the early scenes that fit into the grand unifying theory, half-baked by a good friend in me, that Twin Peaks is actually Dr. Jacoby's hypnotism stage show in Vegas. Costuming is key too. Jacoby's shirt is a map, so it reinforces the visual signal of the map behind him in the scene. In the course of the scene, Jacoby stands at the map and delivers a pseudo-Freudian lecture to Cooper that asserts all of our society's problems are of a sexual nature. By a map of Tibet, Jacoby says the solution is that X is sex. Just 2 episodes earlier, Cooper stood at the map of Tibet and says that, to solve for X, he will throw stones at a glass bottle. Both investigators synchronized the logic of ratiocination with realms of symbolic algebra that exist beyond the conscious human mind. Is it their similarity, rather than their difference, that might be behind Cooper's nearly hostile dismissal of Jacoby? It's worth a calm consideration, and as you ponder their connection, note how the scene ends with a shot of Cooper seated, while Jacoby leans close to his left ear and semi-whispers, "Laura had secrets." The 2-person tableau resembles Laura leaning close to Cooper's left ear in the Red Room to whisper some of those secrets. How can Jacoby replicate Cooper and Laura? Unless this is his hypnosis show in Vegas. Gordon Cole's first appearance follows next. In a shot from the far end of the conference table, Cooper is shown putting Cole's call to the duophone speaker and informing Sheriff Truman, "This is my supervisor." If MST3K were riffing the episode, they'd do the old, "No it isn't, that's a speakerphone" gag here. What I find striking in the scene is Cooper's approach to Cole, rather than what Cole says. Special Agent embodies his impatience and frustration with Albert's request to remove Truman from the office due to their physical altercation, by leaning into the conference table in a gesture that looks a lot like the desk push-ups battling Bud Mullins does in Season 3. What's more, Cooper cuts off Cole mid-sentence when he hangs up. He's really rattled, but is it more by the algebra of solving who murdered Laura, or by disturbances to the ideal image of himself he holds and tries to project? Next stop, Timber Falls Motel. After Cooper's abruptly curtailed call with Cole, Hawk rings to say he's found the one-armed man at the aforementioned motel. 3 storylines connect, and they each contain multiple algebra problems. Bookending the scene is Josie Packard. First, she conducts a private investigator-style stakeout of Ben Horn and Catherine Martell, who are mixing pleasure and business in a motel room. By the end, Josie is already driven away, likely in response to the arrival of the Sheriff's Department. Deputy Hawk alerts Sheriff Truman to the remainder of her stakeout, a round pool of engine oil surrounded by dry pine needles. First bookend follows through on Josie's discovery that Catherine and Ben have been keeping 2 ledgers for the Packard sawmill. The flavour is classic noir. The second bookend, though, gestures at the pool of scorched engine oil that marks the portal between dimensions. The flavour is a weird blend of petroculture and the supernatural. Even though this episode aired well before the concept of the Anthropocene was emerging into the social imaginary, the combination of petroleum, timber extractivism, and another world making itself felt appear in retrospect to be clairvoyant. The Ben-Catherine segment of the scene contains what I consider to be an inconsistency in character. Catherine unhesitatingly reveals her second secret hiding place to Ben. One so secret not even Pete the poodle, as she refers to her husband here, knows about. Was Ben such a sex magician that Catherine's experience an extreme form of pillow talk? The oddball, give little Elvis a bath joke makes it clear that Ben believes he's a hunk of burning love. But Catherine doesn't appear similarly vulnerable before or after this info slip. Up to now, I found this an inconsistency in her characterization, but I have ideas about its possible meaning. The third storyline is that of Philip Gerard, the one-armed man. When the officers break into Gerard's motel room and Truman orders, "Get your hands where I can see them," there's a palpable beat before the scene continues. The pause isn't for laugh, instead for the subtle facial performance by Michael Ontkean as Truman expresses the uncomfortable dissonance between his automatic script for confrontation and Gerard's visible disability. In fact, Truman's discomfort is amplified by Gerard's vulnerability as he's freshly out of the shower and donning only a towel wrapped around his waist. My friend Emma Bush has written about disability in David Lynch's work for 25 years later, and this scene fits into that area of critical analysis. Of special note is Gerard's vulnerability here. Not only is he practically nude and therefore exposed in terms of his disability and his general body, but his distraught tears when coerced to tell Cooper what was tattooed on his arm shade Gerard as an empathetic figure. Is that vulnerability a judo move that's later leveraged to throw the viewers into seeing Gerard as a holder of power? Or is his vulnerability the cornerstone of his capacity to hold power later in the narrative arc? Whichever answer you choose, you'll have to account for the fact that he once was, but has walked away from selling pharmaceuticals. He was part of the legal recto of for-profit drug dealing that's shadowed by the many illegal Verso-side dealers in the series, and the two sides are different, yet mutually imbricated. Just as I would say that the towns of Twin Peaks and Deer Meadow are dictamus, but bound to each other, as if they mutually constitute each other's existence. As a last thought on the Timber Falls Motel, on this rewatch I noticed the audio presence of one or more woodpeckers in the outdoor shots. Non-human beings, specifically birds, are looking for what is hidden in the woods. Woodpecker algebra. And in this episode, the woodpecker itself opens a bird mystery X that gets collaboratively solved. The answer is a minor bird named Waldo, owned by Jacques Renault. Now there are a lot of strange things in this episode, but what I find far and away the strangest is the parole board that hears Hank Jennings make his case and decides to grant him parole. As other critics and scholars have noted, Twin Peaks features an extremely white cast, and the few people of colour in the series present deeply problematic representations. With the parole board, suddenly there are two people of colour, not just in the same scene, but in the same position. To see an African-American man and woman holding legal power over an incarcerated white man is an inversion of the predominant conditions of incarceration in the United States. What ideological buttons does their presence push, in which audience demographics, and how does Hank's white mansplaining to them, his abstract conception of how fate and his crime and punishment are bound together, enhance the ideological button pushing? These questions, and the identity politics embodied in the parole board that sparks them are, I would argue, much more significant surreal touches than that llama in Dr. Lydecker's vet clinic. While on the topic of the political unconscious in Twin Peaks, there's a scene not long after the parole board hearing where Cooper, Truman, Hawk and Andy head to the Sheriff's Department basement gun range in response to Andy's firearm mishap at the Timber Falls Motel. Agent Cooper reveals a strain of sexism in his worldview when he instructs Andy to stop trying to understand Lucy's recent hostility towards him. No logic at work here, Andy. Best to let that one go. In the grand design, women were drawn from a different set of blueprints. The other three men reply with, "Amen." They take their guns in their own hands and shoot some bullets. In the same scene, Cooper tells Truman he's never been married, but that he's been with someone who taught him about commitment, responsibility, and so on. Tellingly, what that relationship meant to Cooper is articulated entirely in response to himself, and where he feels he failed. The agency of love remains comfortably in the man's possession. This is a piece in the puzzle of how misogyny manifests in Agent Cooper. One of the most emotionally sincere and challenging scenes in this episode, perhaps in the series as a whole, unfolds between Ben and Audrey Horne. At first, the camera approaches Ben from above and behind him. The business mogul is riding a stationary bike while moving negotiations along with the Icelandic investors who are interested in the Ghostwood development. The whir of the bike that is spinning, yet going nowhere, combines the needle-on-vinyl groove sonic image that David Lynch returns to time and time again. And in this case, it also mimics the ringing sound that haunts Ben in his office during Season 3 and connects to his reminiscence of the Schwinn bike his father gave him when he was a child. I loved that bike. This later moment comes as he contemplates his grandson's hit-and-run manslaughter of a child, and Ben internalises this as a paternal crisis, the lack of a father. That's a powerful scene that loops back to the moment in this Season 1 episode where Audrey says, "Please let me be your daughter again." Sharon M. Fenn and Richard Beamer deliver stellar performances around that line. She is manipulating him, but is sincere, indicated by a catch in her voice during the line. Yet she takes a turn when spotting a photo of her and Laura on her father's desk. Ben, for his part, appears genuinely to shift out of his real estate scheming mode in response to her plea, but he also turns immediately back that way when a call comes through. This is a scene to watch and re-watch. The algebra is crazy subtle. Tennis at Shark's apartment complex. I love the Scoofy X dropped into the episode. Is it something to solve for, or is it simply a foil? A reminder that quotidian life outside the realms of drug dealing and murder is also a weird spectacle. Finally, Josie, fishing, a domino and its likeness end the episode in a confluence of loops. In the final scene, the fish isn't in the percolator. Instead, Pete invites Josie to partner up with him for a mixed doubles tournament where the algebra is the successful baiting and outwitting of non-human beings by angling towards X. After Josie agrees to the proposal, there's a doubling of sweet dreams between them, multiple dreams and dreamers. But before any sweet dreams, Pete leaves the scene, and Josie is juxtaposed and accentuated through a candid camera angle with the taxidermied bodies of other non-human beings who haunt the rooms of Blue Pine Lodge. These beings go on for others, suspended at a moment in time which they'll never age. Not unlike Laura Palmer in the minds of all who live in Twin Peaks. In the foreground of the shot is a clock, pointing to the weird temporality making itself felt by Josie as she receives a telephone call from Hank Jennings. In Hank's hand, while he asks her simply if she got his message, is a domino. It's a little slab of plastic, a piece in a game. Not unlike the dice that pop up across Season 3, and it exerts an unexplained power of dread over Josie. Hank's message was a drawing of this small plastic game piece. As such, the domino is elsewhere in Hank's hand, yet also right there in the room with Josie in its mediated form. And this doppelganger domino is a pencil and paper likeness that recalls Andy's sketch of Bob in the opening scene. It turns out that the algebraic X of Twin Peaks exists as a nexus point where multiple equations meet, even as they extend into diverse dimensions. Thank you for listening to this audio article from 25yearslatersite.com. Intro and outro theme provided by Ryan Linnich.